As I so often repeat, maybe much too often, it is one of the privileges of old age to reminisce about the past. So I'll do a little bit of that in the beginning. In the time period when I arrived in the United States, which was 1952, I found myself, to my chagrin, in the San Joaquin Valley of California, which I named the California Siberia. Let's put it that way, I was very much looking for something of interest which didn't seem to be around. And I came across publications with advertisements in them, and they more or less were like this. I mean, I'm reconstructing it. Akhenaton, Benjamin Franklin, and Richard Nixon. What did they have in common? They were all Rosicrucians. Please write to AMORC in San Jose, which I did not do. I went there at a subsequent time. Let's say that was one of my impressions of something that called itself Rosicrucian in this latter period. And then years and indeed decades went by, and I found myself on a lecture tour in Germany. This was in the 80s. There were still two Germanys and all that bad business. At that time, largely because I had a waiting period between my lectures in Sweden and then my lectures in Germany, my friends in Germany took me around to various places in the fabulously beautiful state of Baden-Württemberg, where, let me see, in one of the smaller communities, yes, called Bad Steinach, they took me to a beautiful old church, no doubt originally a Catholic church turned Lutheran, and they raced off to get the sexton, I suppose you would call him, who came with a key that was about this size. I haven't seen such a large key in years, and went and opened up some big wooden doors, and behind these doors was a huge and unusual painting. It is still there, and it was introduced to us in German as a Kabbalistische Lehrtafel, which would mean a Kabbalistic instructional image, a beautiful painting. So subsequently, after we took a look at it, we asked the man, well, how come this unusual painting is here in the church? And he said to us, it was commissioned in a long time ago by what was her name? Yeah, it was published. It was commissioned in 1673 by Princess Antonia of Baden, who wanted this to be here in the church. And I said, well, it's great. Why would a princess of Baden want to have such an esoteric picture there? And the old gentleman said to us, with some disdain in his voice, because she was a Rosicrucian. The disdain was for us, not for the late princess. So let's see, these were some of the early encounters with the mysterious subject of the Rosy Cross. Now, as we have already seen in the last few lectures, in every historical period, in speaking now only of Western culture, and of course other cultures have their own, there has been at least one, and sometimes more than one, powerful myth, a great big mythic structure, which was extremely important to the people in our culture, and which in some cases, as with the Grail myth, continued for a long time and developed various sub-stories, sub-myths, so to say, all of which center around a mystery of the Holy Grail. And in the same way with the Arthurian mythic cycle in itself and the others. So in order to make that a little more understandable, I think we also said, at least in so many words, that a myth expresses spiritual truths and perceptions which cannot be perceived or described otherwise. In other words, this is a literary genre, a literary form, which can communicate to us in various subtle and sometimes not so subtle ways, very deep-seated perceptions and insights and truths which are helpful and exciting, and I hesitate to use that much abused term, transformative for our purposes. And so we have come now to yet a later historical period after we have looked at the Arthurian and Grail and ancient Gnostic myths, the Sophia myth and the myth of the great spiritual journey from the Acts of Thomas, and now we come to a period that was really the beginning, you might say, of a very greatly altered and transformed intellectual and spiritual atmosphere in Europe. And that transformation was brought about by the Reformation. People who are not big friends of Martin Luther or of John Calvin, how can anybody be a friend of John Calvin? Very nasty man. But let's say would say that it was not a reformation but a deformation. Because the religious structure was altered in such a way that was very radical, but also had really caused many important religious practices and religious tenets to disappear. And at least some of these disappearing tenets had been very useful prior to their disappearance. And so it was the spiritual vacuum, psycho-spiritual vacuum, created by the religious transformation in so much of Europe, certainly in major portions of Germany, that brought about such phenomena as the beautiful and huge, because it extends way up to the very top of the church. You can hardly see the top of it painting in that particular church, because obviously Princess Antonia, whether she was Rosicrucian or not, probably was, but Princess Antonia was one of the many deserving people in Germany who wanted something more than ordinary, more than prosaic, who were striving for symbolic, often symbolically represented spiritual truth. And they couldn't find it in the religion anymore. Now, of course, to be a little bit fair, I need to interject that in addition to the very helpful spiritual elements, and especially symbolic elements, which went by the wayside at the time of the Reformation, well, maybe there were some other features which were worthy of going by the wayside, like the Holy Inquisition, or the thriving traffic in holy relics, which often were so numerous they couldn't have possibly all belonged to the same object. Like it was said that if you put together all the pieces of wood that were brought over from the Holy Land and that were supposed to have been portions of the true cross, several battleships could have been constructed out of all the wood. So obviously there, it was not a perfect situation, but there were certain elements there which, let's say, by the time of the good Princess Antonia in 1673, and a little before and a little after, were missing. And so I want to review and draw some conclusions from the myth of the Rosicrucians for this evening, because while one doesn't hear that much about it anymore, not even if you go to San Jose, to the AMORC headquarters, but the Rosicrucian myth has been extremely influential in European culture, and its influence is not entirely, has not gone away. So why do I call the Rosicrucian tradition, the Rosicrucian image, a myth? Isn't it really history? Well, the truth is that myth, as such, often disguises itself as history by enlisting historical figures and events, often to increase its own credibility. Of the myths that we referred to earlier, Arthur the king, was in all likelihood a historical person, but he became a mythic figure of immense influence for several centuries. And so it is really, let's say, in the background of all spiritual tradition. So myth is more important than history, and therefore myth survives, maybe is modified here and there, but truly impact-producing myths will continue to produce that impact long after the historical or semi-historical data and figures that appear within the myth have fallen into forgetfulness. And this we need to keep always in mind. So let us then look at the known origins of the Rosicrucian myth. There are concrete data around which the myth constellated itself. The main event of this sort occurred in a 2-year period between 1614 and 1616, when in Kassel in Germany was published first one and then 2 more small books. The first one, which created the biggest sensation, I think, being titled, its abbreviated title at the time of its publication having been in Latin, Fama Fraternitatis, the story of the brotherhood. It contained a brief introduction, brief introduction, wherein the author expressed his hope for a very curious thing that previously has never been really considered very much as a possibility, what it named in its own Latin language, what it named a universal reformation. Now, a religious reformation, had already occurred, and it, of course, only extended in Christendom, and even there only on a portion of Christendom. So we need to remember that the date of publication, for instance, between 1614 and 1616, is well after the Reformation, the religious Reformation in Europe, by way of such clerics as Martin Luther, John Calvin, the Scottish reformer and disciple of Calvin, John Knox, who in his own day was usually referred to kindly as the ranting scourge of Scotland. Ranting scourges seemingly always are among us in one way or the other. What well nigh disappeared from religion was the mystical element. If we look back a couple of 200 years, 300 years from that time, we find that both within the parameters and the confines of Catholic orthodoxy and outside of it, in mighty religious movements of a different nature, such as that of the Cathars, a strong and persistent mystical trend was always present. All of a sudden, you look around, say, Germany, on the religious and on the intellectual scene, and there is no one like Meister Eckhart, there is no one like John Tauler, there is no one like the great female mystics, Hildegard von Bingen and others. Gone, nothing. What puzzled me and still puzzles me to some extent, having tried to study the history of the period in the works of contemporary historians, that this circumstance is seldom brought up and questioned by anyone. Why is there such a great change in the religious orientation of large numbers of persons, from the agricultural laborer to the professors at the universities? How does this come about? And I have not seen really any viable explanation offered in that regard. I have a little theory of my own, I generally do, and how valid it is it's perhaps for you to determine and for others. And my theory on this issue is that something extremely important had been taken out of the Christian religion by the reformers. This was the largest hole that was punched in the Christian religion and in the Catholic religion. And what was that? That the sacraments, particularly the sacrament of the Holy Eucharist, went by the wayside, sometimes faster, sometimes slower. But before you knew it, it wasn't there. And so the Christian people in the countries that turned Protestant, Germany, parts of France, Scandinavia, eventually England, certainly Holland, and so forth, were without any kind of, shall we say, basic mystical practice. And the absence of these basic mystical practices had sort of, if one can use such a trite analogy, pulled the rug out from underneath mystical Christianity. And you might say, well, why is that? If you're a genuine mystic, somebody like Meister Eckhart or somebody like that, well, you'll build your own stairway to heaven. Maybe. But the stairway, at least in medieval Christianity, rested on the seven sacraments, and particularly the consecrated, the transubstantiated bread and wine of the Eucharist. If you think, well, let the talented mystics build their own mystical ladder to heaven, that ladder has to stand on something, and it did not have a foundation any longer. And I think this is a lesson to us in various ways, because it not only pertains to sacramental practice, but it pertains, in addition to that, to a sort of foundational worldview that is based upon, or let's say, that includes in a very prominent fashion the sacred. The sacred. When the sacred goes away, then it is very difficult to have sacred experiences, to move in a sacred direction, because there is no foundation for that particular movement. And that, allowing for different circumstances and all that sort of thing, also pertains, let's say, to our present period in a little different way. Because what we have now is an increasingly secular culture. The spiritual, the religious element is extricated from it. And when the entire culture is of that sort, then it is very difficult for individuals there to utilize the background that they receive from the culture, from their schools, oh yes, even from their churches, and various other modalities, in order to penetrate further into the spiritual realm. It always helps us to keep in mind a scheme which I frequently mention, and which goes back to classical antiquity, especially to the late antiquity, the Spätantike, as we call it in German, wherein it was understood that the human being, and for that matter, all of creation, all of reality, consists of certain levels or layers. The most concrete and the lowest of these layers is the physical, which is recognized by way of the senses. And after that, so let's say our senses, our eyes, our ears, our sense of smell and so forth, they declare to us what is around us. All right? Then come our feelings, our emotions. So what is around us, what kind of a world do we live in, and then the emotions say, do I like it or don't I like it? They react to them in a feeling tone fashion. And when that has been done, at least that's how the ancients, the Greeks, Romans, Egyptians, and so forth saw it, then there comes something else. And that's this something else is probably the most promising and at the same time also the most disastrous of our faculties whereby we deal with reality, and that is our thinking. Because now, when we have recognized something as existing, we reacted to it emotionally, now we begin to think about it. Now, am I advocating a thoughtless life? No, I don't. In fact, I think the lives of most people in our culture right now are far more thoughtless than they should be. It's not that there is too much thinking, but there is not enough. However, there is an issue there that requires attention, and that is that the ancients recognized that while thinking is very important, and where thinking sort of fleshes out the experience that we are dealing with and that we are striving for, thinking can also be a tremendous trap. Because, as I'm sure that you are aware, maybe even more in difficult times such as the ones that we have just lived through and are still living through, wherein our thinking is revved up. There is a thinking machine, the little robot or big robot inside. It keeps churning and making noises, and it won't let us sleep, it won't let us enjoy ourselves, it won't let us nourish our hopes. It's just there, boom, 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 back and forth. And so we get caught in our thinking. But that is not evident. The thinking function, as C.G. Jung calls it, the thinking function is so constituted that it carries a conviction within itself that it is going to be disclosing very important things to the rest of us. It is a place of promise, but the promises are sometimes not fulfilled. And especially when the promises of the thinking function project themselves into the spiritual realm, then they are bound to disappoint us, because the thinking function of our mind does not have the capacity to break through into transcendence, to break through into something that is beyond physical, beyond emotional, and beyond mental. A teacher, I could consider him a teacher of mine, the late Professor Ernest Wood, a great and wonderful gentleman who spoke here many times, he coined a number of good sentences, and one of them says, you have one thing you have to remember about thinking, and that is that thinking only leads to more thinking. It cannot lead beyond itself. And that is, of course, a very great limitation. And so, because it is past the thinking function where that mysterious realm begins, which is the territory within which the mystic travels. Jung has often referred to at least one of the portions of that as the transcendent function. So it is the thinking function, feeling function, so the transcendent function. But the transcendent function will not get going unless the other three functions sort of begin to see their own limits. And unfortunately that is not the case. And the greatest tyrant, the really bad boy among these is the thinking function. Because it goes on and on and on, and it spins itself into a cocoon of its own making, and eventually the consciousness can see through that cocoon. You can see that, for instance, in the world of politics, much more powerfully now, even in the United States and elsewhere. People, good old New Age saying, people create their own reality, and then what happens? Then they have to live in it. Oh, God have mercy, you know. And of course, which is also a problem, they'll create not only their own reality, they try to create my reality, your reality, and we don't want it. You see, we want our own reality and not that one. But that is the incredible power of thinking. And so this is what happened, I think, on a collective level with religion. Subsequent to the Reformation, that a mostly prosaic intellectual attitude toward religious matters became commonplace, and the preachers were just that. They were talkers. That is what preaching means. And you say, oh well, all right, but they weren't burning people anymore on the stake. Well, that's not exactly true. I don't want to sort of become the local Stephen King here now, but the intolerance and the cruelty of certain Protestant groups in Europe, and maybe New England killing of witches and things like that here too, was monumental. Many of you are, people who come to my things are always familiar with Jung, and so you will know something about the Red Book and about the 7 sermons to the dead and so forth. You know those dead, in the 7 sermons that originated the issue that the dead came to Jung. What was the physical inducement to that? That a large number of decayed and sort of mummified dead bodies were found in the lake of Zurich, very close to Jung's house in Bollingen, his summer house. And Jung saw them when they dragged these cadavers out. And well, he was a doctor and probably has seen cadavers, but he was not at all happy. And you know who these were? These were a religious sect, or members of a religious sect at the time of the Reformation, who were, well, one of the names for those kinds of people is Anabaptists, which means that Wiedertäufer in German, because the original baptism administered by maybe the Catholic Church did not consider to be valid, so they felt that everybody has to be rebaptized. This was one of their big deals. Well, the Calvinists who were running the show in Geneva and there killed them by the hundreds, by the thousands, and drowned them in the lakes of Switzerland. And some of these, the results of this drowning were discovered at that time. Or maybe pick another one which is not as tragic as that, but there was a seer, natural-born mystic up in Silesia, way up there near where the Czech Republic ends and Prussia begins and so forth, by the name of Jakob Böhme. Jakob Böhme was a shoemaker. He subsequently came to be called the mystic shoemaker of Görlitz. But he had very unusual experiences, to begin with, and many insight-producing visions. He wrote a number of books. The chief one, I think, was called they were written in German by then, Aurora die Morgenröte. I never forget when I held in my hand the original copy of it in Austria, which some friends of mine had. But anyway, it is filled with his take on Kabbalah, on astrology. He mentions Sophia, the Weisheit, over and over again. He was a post-Reformation era Gnostic. And who was persecuting him and riding him and making life utterly miserable for him for decades and decades? The Lutheran clergy, who wanted freedom for themselves, religious freedom, but who would not accord religious freedom to somebody else, and so on and so forth. So let us say it was a confused and confusing time, and that shouldn't be strange to us because we live in another confused and confusing time of major proportions right now. Now, where do the Rosicrucians come in? Well, there's something very mysterious, because these two books which I mentioned, and which were then followed by a third one, published in Kassel, without any kind of an authentic authorship, brought forth what we now, I think, justly would call a new myth, which became much more influential than we realize. I have here with me this gigantic, heavy book, which is enough to break one's back, which is I have 5 volumes of these, and they are all collections of a sort of encyclopedic publication, which is actually quite good, called Man, Myth and Magic, edited in the 60s by an English author, Richard Cavendish, and where the various articles on different subjects are really, for the most part, written by quite knowledgeable people. And so what I will do is, if you don't mind, and I'll even do it if you mind, but I don't think you're going to mind very much, I will give you just a few little paragraphs about the early Rosicrucian history from that book, because it will create a certain kind of skeletal material for us on which we can build the rest of our insights. Here is what something that the author of this article, let's see, what's his name? I'm supposed to know this author too because he wrote several books. Maybe I shouldn't bother with it. In any event, what he says here, I think, is quite interesting. He says the substance of the Rosicrucian legend, and he calls it legend also, originated in 3 short books that were published anonymously between 1614 and 1616. The first, which was no more than a slim pamphlet, was printed at Kassel in 1614. Its title is Fama Fraternitatis, and it purported to come from a hitherto unknown Rosicrucian order or brotherhood. It contained no information whatever about the order's chiefs and where they might be found. So, mysterious work altogether. But it did give an account, a legend, as we would call it now, a myth of how this Rosicrucian brotherhood got started. It started with a man whom they called Christian Rosenkreuz, which means Christian Rosy Cross. And the Fama, the story of the fraternity, largely deals with the alleged life of this alleged person, Christian Rosenkreuz. So it begins with the story of Christian Rosenkreuz's travels in search of knowledge and true wisdom, and ends with an account of the order that commemorated his name. Christian Rosenkreuz, the son of noble but poor parents, was placed in a monastery at the age of 5. That's a little bit too early, I would say. And there learned some Greek and Latin. When he was still a youth, a certain monk took him on a pilgrimage to the Holy Sepulchre. That would be in Jerusalem, of course. This monk who took him there died at Cyprus and hence never reached Jerusalem. Christian Rosenkreuz continued to journey alone and in due course arrived at Damascus. Now that, of course, was then and now Syria. While it was still his intention to go to Jerusalem, he remained at Damascus for a while because his medical skill was so highly esteemed. He now comes the occult, the mystical part. He now learned of the wise men at Damkar in Arabia, which is non-existent location as far as one can determine, and with difficulty made his way there. By this time he was 16 years old. He was given a warm welcome as if he had long been expected. The wise men already knew his name and, much to his surprise, told him of secret matters relating to his old monastery, where he came from. He learned Arabic and was able to translate a mysterious Liber M, the book M, a book which has not been identified, into Latin, and also greatly increased his knowledge of mathematics and the natural sciences. Now, one of the features which I hope to explore, which I think is very important one arising out of the Rosicrucian mythos, is already indicated here. He goes to a mysterious place and there meets a group of wise men. And this contact, apparently in Arabia, well, one hopes that there were more wise men there at that time than maybe today. Afghanistan and so forth. Afghanistan was also a great place of Sufi wisdom long time ago. In any event, so there is the indication of the wise men who are somewhere in secrecy and who can instruct you about very important things. Now, the story proceeds, and we subsequently another book was published, and a third one. And the second book was called the Confessio, as the first one was the story of the Brotherhood. This is the confession of the Brotherhood. So it's like more theoretical teaching. And then finally, there is the Fama Fraternitatis, the story of the fraternity, the confession of the fraternity, and then finally there is published in Strasbourg in 1616 with 3 further editions the same year. That's how popular these things were by them. The first English version of this was the English title, The Hermetic Romance, or The Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz. The chemical should be construed as in a basically alchemical sense. So the only disclosure, let's say, of something that might be in the nature of spiritual or quasi-spiritual practice is in the third book, because it is, while highly romanticized and sort of poeticized, nevertheless a book about alchemy. Now these were the sources. Now, as to who Christian Rosenkreuz was, if he was anybody at all, that we are left in the dark about that. Now there's an interesting statement, which, believe it or not, even has a synchronistic verification right in this neighborhood, if you can think such a thing, is that the French early 20th century poet and writer and esotericist Maurice Margre, in his splendid small work, which is translated as The Return of the Magi, says that Christian Rosenkreuz was from a German noble family of no longer very rich nature, and that his family were secret or semi-secret Cathars, and that he somehow received the inspiration that he was to continue to bring forth again in a new format, but with the same substance, the same esoteric or Gnostic tradition which the Cathars represented. The Cathar, incidentally, is a Greek word, means pure one, and the religion of the Cathars, sometimes also called Albigensians, was the biggest, most powerful Christian heresy probably of all of Christian history, but certainly of the Middle Ages, and it was of of very Gnostic nature and holds a great deal of interest to people like us. We usually, in March, we usually celebrate a particular holiday dedicated to the Cathars. But in any event, a German Cathar, and there were such, Cathar family living in secrecy for, well, would have been probably like about a couple of 100 years, and that their son, Christian, then went about to sort of reconstruct a format for the esoteric tradition, whereby it could be communicated and wherein people could have, let's say, experiences of an esoteric nature. But now if you want to know how that joins up with Beechwood Drive, let me tell you. Maurice Mager says that he knows, and that it was known in the French esoteric circles, that the name of the family out of which the Christian Rosenkreuz with that pseudonym came forth was von Görmishausen. Well, I want you to know that within walking distance from here, on Woodhaven Drive, just up from the Beechwood Center, there still stands a very beautiful, artistically constructed house, and its owner, whom by chance I met, and I was in the house several times, name was Alwin von Görmishausen. So now you can start a new mythology, but I let you start it. I'm not going to. Which is that Christian Rosenkreuz has reappeared in Hollywood. You see, this is where the true Rosicrucian adept is. However, many circumstances that come our way are meaningful. And I thought that in a certain way that was meaningful too. So the story continues. Christian Rosenkreuz, maybe Görmishausen, travels home through various countries and finally arrives in Germany, where he gathers a group of mystically oriented, learned men who became the first brothers of the Rosy Cross. This is what is told in the Farmer, in the story of the fraternity. And from then on he came to be referred to as Father CRC for Christian Rosenkreuz. So after a long life, well over 100 years, he dies. And he is buried in a seven-sided vault in a secret building in a forest, the building itself being called Sanctus Spiritus, Holy Spirit, or the House of the Holy Spirit. A special holiday is celebrated by the Brothers of the Rosy Cross, according to that book, on the feast of Corpus Christi. Now, this in itself is quite interesting, because first of all, there is no festival of the year that is more Roman Catholic than the feast of Corpus Christi. It originated in Fronleichnam in German. It originated in Belgium, in the city of Ghent in Flanders, wherein a visionary holy nun, subsequently sainted Saint Juliana or pardon me, she was born in Liège, in Lutix, in Saint Juliana of Liège. In any event, Saint Juliana had a vision when she was looking out at the night sky and saw the full moon. I think there's a full moon right about now. In any event, before her eyes, the full moon changed into the sacred host of the Eucharist. And she then persuaded the clerics in that area that they should hold a special festival, at which time, we don't need to go into the details. In any event, the consecrated host, or the Eucharistic host, would be carried in solemn procession out of the church into the streets of the city and to the city gates, where a blessing for the fields was given and so forth. And this became the festival of Corpus Christi, body of Christ. I lived for a number of years in a lovely but very cold and wet town in Austria, in the Austrian Alps, which is probably the only place in the world where the Corpus Christi procession is held on the water, on the lake of Hallstatt. They bring the sacrament down from the church to these beautifully decorated boats, filled with flowers, and the festival of Corpus Christi is in the middle of summer, very near to Pentecost, and then paddle out to the middle of the lake and give the blessing from there. People come from all over Europe to see that particular occasion. In any event, certainly not a very Protestant occasion, let's put it that way. But somehow, in the Fama itself, it is mentioned that the Feast of Corpus Christi should be the important festival of the Rosicrucians, because it is connected with Christian Rosenkreuz. Much of this is, by the way, is disclosed in the second book, the Confessio Fraternitatis. In fact, the books foretell a sort of mystic return prophecy of Christian Rosenkreuz, namely that he had stated in writing that he would return. The chronology runs like this. Christian Rosenkreuz, according to the books, was born in 1378. His life lasted 106 years, and then he dies. But he foretells, and here is the Latin sentence, post centum viginti annos patebo. After 120 years, I will reappear. He doesn't say he will be reincarnated or whatever, which would mean that the reappearance would have occurred at the time of the publication of the first of the books in Kassel in 1615. So now the mystery that is still with us, and probably always will be, and never will be solved, reappears. I don't think this is it's that I want. So now there developed a legend that somewhere hidden away physically in this world, probably in Germany, there is a group of wise men of superhuman stature and knowledge and wisdom and abilities. And that those who live right and undergo the necessary internal transformations and initiations can come close to these people and receive from them directions how to manage their own lives and how to facilitate the universal reformation of the world. This is now the underlying Rosicrucian legend that arose out of these three books. By the way, it is almost certain that the three books are written anonymously, as far as publication was concerned, were written by a Lutheran cleric in the town of Calw in Baden-Württemberg, who was the head of the major church there. Where I could say this, that the Rosicrucians couldn't have found a lovelier place to get started, because Calw is an absolutely enchanting little town. And it's very close to Tübingen, where the Tübingen University is, and indeed not very far from the princess's beautiful Kabbalistic picture, which, by the way, just to tell you what it depicts, is an artistically elaborated picture of the Kabbalistic tree of life. And it depicts a garden with a gate, and then inside the garden are trees and flowers, all kinds of things, a number of people sort of walking about and standing around, and then a big, massive, tower-like building which has appropriately 10 stories. The 10 stories of the Kabbalistic tree of life is behind, and when they have undergone sort of their purifications in the garden, that is where the people are let in, and that's where they can climb up. One of the features that might interest some of you, I don't know whether there are any sons of Hiram here or not, is that the one of the clearly visible emblems on this tower is the square and compasses, which is used in Freemasonry. So, you know, it's a real mysterious, complex situation. And so, with the exception of the chemische Hochzeit, the chemical wedding, which is an experience that Christian Rosenkreuz goes through, and which is obviously the chemical reunion within the individual of the alchemical elements, and consequently the coming forth of a person of great holiness and wisdom. There Christian Rosenkreuz himself gives an account of his experience. Other than that, it is the books are mostly philosophical, and you might say, if you are thus inclined, that you can find indications in the three books of a sort of spiritually utopian image, to the effect that inasmuch as the brothers of the Rosy Cross, under the guidance of Father Christian Rosenkreuz, are in the world, even though only those can contact them who are worthy, and consequently hardly anybody ever contacts them, that what their mission is to facilitate the regeneration, the reformation of the world along spiritual lines. In other words, that these are the guiding spirits of a secret spiritual movement, which really has no place, has no name, which strives for the transformation, the spiritualization, the enlightenment of the world. As time went on and we came up to the era of the Enlightenment, for instance, then it was sort of understood by many of the Enlightenment philosophers that behind the philosophy of the Enlightenment there was a guidance, and that the enlightenment of the world is guided by some secret and mysterious but extremely wise and spiritually extremely potent persons. There is even that with such a secret and secretive situation, you fall back to individual episodes. For instance, there is a connection which actually some fairly important people of the past and of the present have advocated and endorsed, that the foundation of the American Republic was in some way inspired and perhaps even led by persons who have connection with the Rosicrucian adepts. And this I am taking now from the legacy of Mr. Manly Hall, who very much believed in this. He considered himself a spiritual Rosicrucian, and he said so. In any event, Mr. Hall's writing, The Secret Destiny of America, which I can very much recommend. Has now been enlarged by another little book added to it, very expertly edited by Mitch Horowitz, and that is where you will find a longer version of what I'm telling you now. He described how United States of America was the product of these are his words, a great plan. A plan for religious liberty and self-governance, launched by a hidden assembly of people, a hidden order of ancient philosophers and secret societies. In one chapter, Manly Hall described a rousing speech delivered by a mysterious unknown speaker before the signing of the Declaration of Independence. The strange man, as Mr. Hall called him, invisibly entered and exited the locked doors of the State House in Philadelphia on July 4, 1776, delivering an oration that bolstered the wavering spirits of the delegates, and that these were some of his words. God has given America to be free, commanded the mysterious speaker, urging the men to overcome their fears of being hanged or beheaded by the British, and to seal destiny by signing the great document. Newly emboldened, the delegates rushed forward to add their names. They looked to thank the stranger only to discover that he had vanished from the locked room. Was this, Mr. Hall wondered, and now I am quoting his word, one of the agents of the secret order guarding and directing the destiny of America. Now, I know something because I had discussed this with Mr. Hall and also from other sources. I know quite well how Mr. Hall came upon this story and this document. And it has, believe it or not, something to do with our Hollywood and, in fact, with Beechwood Canyon. In that, as you may recall, this from the very end of the 1800s until about 1920, there was a large colony of my fellow theosophists here in Hollywood, and it was called Crotona after the Greek name of Pythagoras' colony in Sicily. Now, their big organizer, and apparently I've met his widow, but not him, was Mr. Warrington, A.P. Warrington. Warrington came by an early publication, going back almost to the very date of the American Revolution, the American War of Independence, which described the coming and the influence of this mysterious person, the speech of the unknown, and that was published in the 1840s again under the title of Washington His Generals. In any event, the speech of the unknown, as it was named by Mr. Warrington, who was the secretary of the Theosophical Society here, but he indicated that this came to him from a rare volume of early American political speeches. The speech appeared in 1938 in the Society's journal, The Theosophist, with some earlier material that came from Madame Blavatsky herself, who had indicated there that she had in her possession documents that prove without a shadow of a doubt that brethren whom some would call the brethren of the Rosy Cross were involved in the inspiring and the early beginnings of the American Revolution and the independence of the United States, and that she had such documents in her possession. This was quoted again in 1938 in the International Theosophical Journal, The Theosophist. So now we have a real peculiar situation here. Let's say, is it or isn't it likely or plausible that the Rosicrucian mythos has really produced some kind of secret assembly of wise people, perhaps people even of considerable spiritual power and influence, who here and there, when they are able, have a way of entering, I almost said intruding, into world affairs and influence some of these world affairs in a direction that they desire, and which is in conformity with the, let's say, with the esoteric tradition. Now, another little surprise. You know who was really interested in this story? The one that I just told you, the document, and of the speaker who appeared at the signing of the Declaration of the Independence, and who repeated it on various occasions in public, was a president of the United States, who many of you probably remember by the name of Ronald Reagan, who incidentally was quite friendly with Manly Hall, and I have personal knowledge that Mr. Reagan, when still governor of California, had come over to PRS and visited Mr. Hall more than once. In any event, there are people to whom this story appealed. But let's say behind the story there is the mystery. And this mystery is difficult to handle. But let's say it is by no means impossible that in some fashion the spiritual impulse which came in wake of the Reformation in Germany and elsewhere, and which had as one of its important objectives the universal reformation of the world, of trying to bring a more free, a more spiritual, and ultimately more transcendentally focused and oriented spirit into the world. Now, if you look around on the surface now, or even sometimes earlier, I don't think you will find much evidence of it. Yet at the same time, and you know, I've been here now on this earth for quite a long time. I have lived through some horrendous and strange times in World War II and elsewhere, and I, in spite of my Hungarian pessimism, I can testify to the fact that when things get really dark, when it seems that the redeeming light of the world is nowhere to be found, something happens. And some impulse, some input, some inspiration arises maybe in several places, and that it is perhaps these inspirations that have kept us and are keeping us from just completely falling into the abyss. Yes. I remember Mr. Hall one time telling us, he says, just wait. When things get bad enough, the guidance, the light will appear. But you have to know how to look for it. Okay? And it may not be of the exact kind that you desire, but it will be there. We are not left alone. We are not really like orphans, but we do have very secretly, very much hidden, very much concealed, we have some help that is other than ordinary, that is extraordinary. Now I know that as time went on, and there's no need for us to review these data because they are generally available. I mean, all kinds of occult organizations, not just the one in San Jose, but others, the Rosy Cross Fellowship, which was is still based, I think, in Oceanside, California, and with whose founder, Max Heindel, as he called himself, his name was really von Grashof. And that was the first place where the young Manly Palmer Hall came to in California, and where he stayed for about a year. And he had a very high opinion of Max Heindel and others. In fact, in Calf, the beautiful town where possibly the three Rosicrucian books originated, when I was there, was a somewhat deteriorating old organization which called itself the Lectorium Rosicrucianum, founded by a Dutchman, Van Reichenborg, and which now, sort of like a lot of these, had it mainly consisted of aging and aged persons, and well, it was, shall we say, not a very vital organization anymore. But both there and elsewhere in the history of Europe, pretty much beginning at the time when the Rosicrucian documents were published, there appear indications of this secret guidance, and of some people who were in contact with it. At the time of the Napoleonic Wars, the Tsar Alexander I of Russia, when he came to Germany, met with the Prussian King Frederick Wilhelm, and it is openly stated in the history books of the time that they immediately went to a secret room I think in Potsdam, and there spent a great deal of time in the secret rites, because they were the two Rosicrucian rulers, the King of Prussia and the Tsar of Russia. So these stories are not without foundation. But so let us say it is quite possible that in some mysterious ways, either physical or non-physical, an element of guidance, an assembly of souls who are capable of doing that, an element of guidance is present behind the stage of history that is capable of helping us and capable of pulling us from the edge of the abyss where even at the present time it would seem in many ways we seem to be standing. But let me throw in one final possibly related circumstance. As many of you are aware, in the esoteric world, in the occult world of Theosophy and the various other movements and schools that were spawned in the late 19th century, many of them inspired by Madame Blavatsky and so forth, this very legend of the Rosy Cross had been turned into something that often was called the masters of the wisdom. And that these were envisioned sometimes as physical, sometimes as spiritual beings, but beings who are capable of exerting a spiritual influence and inspiring such people who can be inspired, so that the wisdom tradition and its blessings would not perish. I joined the Theosophical Society in 1952, while having been in touch with it already in Europe before I came here. And of course, especially at that time, and soon then in the early 50s, this became our Theosophical Lodge here. And that's all you heard in Theosophical circles, and even more among the followers of Alice Bailey. The masters, the adepts, the great white brotherhood, and I always wondered, okay, how do you guys know that it's white? I mean, you know, why not give it some other color? And this sort of thing. For myself, and I don't claim any great insight into these matters, but to me somehow there was always something wrong with it. I never could quite accept these teachings the way they were put forth, with the possible exception of what I told you now, that there may be some magical personages, probably not even in the body, who are able to exert certain influences. But I came to a new, hopefully a new insight, and a new way, at least for myself, to explain this issue. And with that I will conclude. And you know where that came from? That came from the Red Book of C.G. Jung, and was hinted at already before in some of Jung's writing, because in Memories, Dreams and Reflections, his autobiographical work edited by Anil Jaffe, he made a brief reference to a being, a fantasy figure, a spiritual figure, whom he called Philemon. And he said he had some encounters with Philemon, was very important to him. That's all he said in that particular book. And he says, then he went to, I think the United Nations was in Geneva at that time, and he there met a Hindu gentleman who was a delegate to the outfit, and they were speaking together, and the Indian gentleman, prompted by Jung, said to him, well, yes, he says, in India it's our tradition that if we are working for transcendence, for the spiritual things, if we want to develop along these deeper lines, that we have a guru. And then he said, most people have a living guru, who is a teacher accomplished in yoga and so forth, and who can help them along. But he said, he looked at Jung, he said, some of us, however, have a purely spiritual guru, who is not in the flesh. And he said, I have such a one, and he was long ago Shankaracharya, one of the great wise men, the founders of Vedanta philosophy. That's what all Jung said, and that gave me a hint. And then, with the full power, he describes Philemon, whom he regards as a super guru at the spiritual level, and of what immense importance to him this person was. There is even a picture in the Red Book that Jung painted of Philemon's likeness and so forth. And I said, no, this is the first really, as far as I can see, 100% authentic statement of this mystery. And up to this point, the mystery looks like this. When an individual gets to a certain point of his own inner development, the likelihood is that this individual will come in contact with and will meet a mysterious figure. A mysterious figure in the spiritual worlds, which at times might even assume a quasi-physical appearance. But there is such a possibility of the inner guide, the inner initiator, and let's say, the inner teacher. And certainly to Jung, Philemon was that. It is not a fantasy, it is not something that he made up, it is something that it is somebody who really exists, but not in the physical body and not like other people. So here I think is possibly the keyhole into which we have to put the key. And the key is we need to aspire not in order to meet a particular guru, not in order to meet a particular master, but in order to master our own psyche, in order to master ourselves, in order to step over into a world where the inspiration, transformation exists, and from whence it comes into our world. And to the extent that we may realize that, and at times even be in contact with that, to that extent we will have joined the house of the Holy Spirit. We will have come to the house of Christian Rosenkreuz, because that is where the spiritual initiation occurs. Within us, within the spiritual worlds, we have the ability, we have the potential to be there and to go there. But in order to realize that potential, we have to become truly selfless in the sense of abrogating the dominion over us of our psychological ego, and of moving to a higher being which is available to us and which is actually connected with us right now. Has been called the higher self, or Jung called it just the self with a capital S. The sooner we are in contact with that interior being, with that initiatory and transformative, inspiring presence, the closer we will be to the true Rosy Cross. And the Rosicrucian tradition was a particular way of bringing this mystery into activity among people, and of leading some of those who were capable of dealing with these mysterious contacts to the place, the inward place where it may be done. I am convinced now at the very latter part of my life, that there are mysterious Rosicrucian adepts, but I don't think that they're in the physical world. I think that they are in the spiritual world. And we have to recognize that that is the world where we have to go to meet them. That is the world where we have to get the inspiration. That is the realm from whence the guidance and the blessing and the insight of the world comes from. And the more of us become capable of that, the more likely it will be that this tormented, wrong-headed, dark and often demonic world can still be redeemed, can still be changed into something good, and that the good may come forth. Nah ist und schwer zu fassen der Gott, wo aber Gefahr ist, da not das Rettende auch. Hölderlin, one of the German poets, near but very difficult to grasp is the Godhead, is the deity. But where there is danger, the redeeming power, the saving power approaches also. I think these are indications of such a power. The way they have been explained, the way they have been dogmatized, the way they have been romanticized, that's something else. But there is something there. There is some help. There is some guidance. There is some goodness. There is some spiritual power which is still available to us. And why is it available to us? Because we ourselves are a spiritual power. We are selling ourselves short when we identify only with our physical body or with the physical circumstances of the culture where we find ourselves. That is not what is important is something profound, something deep, something glorious within us, which can join us to the greater glory. So this is a very complex and very peculiar subject, but I've been working on it for years, and that is pretty much the conclusion that I came to. Yes, there is help. Yes, there is wisdom. Yes, there is a redeeming power, and if we address ourselves to it and we prepare ourselves to be with it, it will come to us and with us and through us to this sad but redeemable world. So thank you very much.